Have you ever walked into a church and even though you were surrounded by people, felt completely alone? Have you ever attended a service, a mass, a moment of worship, and it seemed like everyone was connecting with God, except you? Some people carry this feeling for years in silence, thinking that the problem is within them. Maybe they believe their faith isn't strong enough, or that they're too weak in their spiritual walk. But what if I told you this isn't weakness? What if this is actually a sign that you're being called to something greater? Many people experience this disconnection from the religious environment and blame themselves for it. But that feeling might be one of the clearest signs that God is speaking to you in a different way. It's not that you don't believe in God, on the contrary. What's happening is that there's a voice inside you crying out for more. A deeper search that can't be satisfied with the same old answers. A thirst that cannot be quenched by memorized words or repeated rituals. That restlessness, that discomfort. It's not rebellion, it's a calling to look within, because some people weren't made to simply follow. They were made to awaken, and the awakening usually begins when everything that once made sense suddenly no longer does. Comment below. Have you ever felt out of place inside a church? I want to hear your story. And if this message spoke to you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. There's something burning inside certain people. A kind of fire that can't be seen with the eyes, but that silently burns within. It feels like an urgency, a constant inner stirring that won't let you just accept things as they are. This fire doesn't come from ego or pride. It's not about wanting to stand out or to be special or better than others. It comes from a deeper place, an ancient knowing, as if your soul already understands something your mind is only now beginning to grasp. The chosen ones feel this fire, and even when they try to ignore it, even when they try to fit into the rules, the structures, the traditions, that fire still burns. It refuses to go out, because it wasn't lit by human hands. It came from above. It's this fire that makes you question, search, and even doubt what you've been taught, while at the same time trusting in a certainty you can't explain. It's a kind of wisdom that can't be learned from books or from sermons. You simply know, even without evidence, even without explanation. The chosen ones aren't guided by what their eyes see or ears hear. They are guided from within. They can feel when something is real and when it's just for show. And that makes them uncomfortable, because the world is full of appearances. Often the chosen feel lonely. No one understands the fire. No one understands the intensity. But even that loneliness is part of the process. It's in that emptiness that God's voice becomes clearer. It's in the silence that the fire is fed and grows. This fire doesn't come to destroy, it comes to transform. First, it burns away everything false, everything that was placed upon you but was never truly you. Then it begins to reveal who you truly are. This is the beginning of the path of the chosen, a path that isn't easy, but it's real. For a long time, people have been taught that leaving the church means leaving God, that if you're not present in services, in masses, in rituals, then your faith must be weak, that you're in the world. But that's not always true. There are people who don't fit into religious structures, not because they're lost, but because they've already awakened to something deeper. They don't reject faith. They just can't live inside a mold that limits what they feel burning inside. This disconnection, most of the time, doesn't begin with anger. It begins with silence, with an inner emptiness that slowly grows inside the soul. You follow all the steps, you pray more, you fast more, and still nothing changes. But this isn't rebellion, it's spiritual maturity. It's like a child who can no longer live on milk alone. They need something more solid, more real, more direct from the source. The chosen ones go through this because they weren't called to repeat formulas. They were called to live real, personal experiences with the divine. They happen in the silence of your room, on a solitary walk, or in the stillness of the night when your heart just can't fall asleep. This disconnection hurts, because it often comes with guilt. You know you love God, but you start feeling like something's wrong with you, like you've failed, but you haven't failed. You're simply crossing a spiritual threshold, and that transition matters. It's what separates inherited faith from lived faith. It takes you off autopilot and places you face to face with the divine, raw, unfiltered, with no intermediaries. It's not rejection, it's rebirth. When we start to step away from the traditional expressions of faith, something beautiful happens. The silence, which once felt empty, begins to fill with meaning. It's as if a new frequency begins to tune in, a voice that doesn't come from the outside, but from within. That's when many discover that God never stopped speaking. We were just conditioned to believe He only speaks through someone else, the pastor, the priest, the prophet, the leader. Yes, God can use people, but when you're one of the chosen, He wants to speak directly to you. And He does. Not through audible words, not through thunder from the skies, but through deep intuition, through sudden clarity, through that strange peace that shows up in the middle of chaos. Sometimes it's in a dream, sometimes in a thought that keeps returning, even when you try to push it away. It's a silent communication, but it's more powerful than any sound. Your codes, your pain, your path. Many people try to silence that inner voice. They try to go back to depending solely on what they hear in sermons, in services, in books, because it's easier, it's more comfortable. But the inner voice demands courage. It stirs parts of you that you'd rather keep locked away, and yet the chosen ones can no longer ignore it. Even when they try to fit in again, even when they pretend they don't hear it, the voice remains, calling, guiding, correcting, comforting. That voice is the proof that the Spirit is alive within you. And it doesn't need a microphone, a pulpit, or an audience. It only needs silence and honesty. When that voice becomes stronger and clearer, another truth begins to unfold. God has never been confined to a place. He's always been within you. For so long, we were taught that we needed to go to a temple, a church, a sacred space to speak to God, as if He required a special environment to hear us. But the truth is, the real temple is your body, your mind, your awakened consciousness. When Jesus said, "The kingdom of God is within you," He wasn't using poetic language. He was revealing a deep spiritual secret. Sooner or later, the chosen ones realize this. You begin to notice that you can feel the divine presence in the silence of your room, in the middle of traffic, on a walk through nature, or even in the hardest moment of your life. Because God doesn't need cathedrals. He lives in sincere hearts. The true altar is inside you. No candles are needed, no special clothes, only truth. When the connection is genuine, you could be kneeling on your living room floor or sitting silently with your eyes closed and still feel heaven opening within. The chosen ones understand this because they feel it. You begin to pay attention to what you feel, to what you think, to what you carry inside. This awareness changes everything, the way you pray, the way you live, the way you connect with others, because wherever you are, God is. Wherever you breathe with faith, the Spirit manifests. And where there is truth, there is no need for religious masks. The living temple that you are was not built by human hands. It was formed in secret in the womb of creation. And that's exactly where God loves to dwell the most. In the beginning, the church was born from a beautiful purpose. It was a place of gathering, of communion, where people shared bread, shared the word, shared their faith. There was no luxury, no rigid hierarchy. It was simple. It was alive. Spirituality was felt with an open heart, not through fear or obligation. But over time, things began to change. What started as a movement became an institution. What was once a relationship became a system. What was freedom became rules. The church started to look more like a structure of power than a place of healing. It began to impose paths instead of helping each person discover their own. And so, many began to feel out of place. Because when the Spirit blows wherever it wills, it disturbs closed systems, it breaks protocols, it challenges traditions, and not everyone is ready for that. Of course, there are still churches doing beautiful work, places that welcome, that heal, that set people free. But sadly, others have lost their focus, more concerned with numbers than souls, with appearances than essence. And when you're one of the chosen, you begin to feel the weight of that. You notice that many times, what was meant to be a space of communion becomes a place where faith feels like a performance, where spirituality is measured by how well you follow the rules, and where God is presented as someone distant, who only draws near if you get everything exactly right, and that is suffocating. You adapt out of love, out of respect, out of not wanting to disappoint, but there comes a moment when the heart can no longer bear it. The soul begins to cry out for freedom, and that's when the awakening deepens. Because when you realize that your faith doesn't depend on a building or a schedule or a system, you begin to live something true, something that cannot be controlled or sold, something found only within you. When the soul finally understands it no longer needs to fit into limiting structures, it begins to breathe differently. The weight lifts from your shoulders, and in its place comes lightness, freedom. This is the essence of true spirituality, freedom. I'm not talking about doing everything your own way, as if God were an accessory to fit your will. That's not it. I'm talking about living a real faith, without fear of punishment, without needing to prove anything to anyone. A faith born from relationship, not obligation. The chosen ones don't rebel against religion out of vanity. They simply refuse to live a caged faith, where you're only considered spiritual if you follow a predefined script. I'm talking about living a real faith without fear of punishment, without needing to prove anything to anyone. A faith born from relationship, not obligation. The chosen ones don't rebel against religion out of vanity. They simply refuse to live a caged faith, where you're only considered spiritual if you follow a predefined script, where your connection to God depends on the approval of others. They sense something much greater than that, because true spirituality doesn't build fences, it opens doors, it doesn't suffocate, it expands. And the closer you come to the divine in sincerity, the freer you become, free from judgment, from comparison, from imposed guilt, from performance. You begin to notice God in the simplest things, in a breeze, in a kind gesture, in a moment of silence. His presence is no longer confined to a temple or an event. It is everywhere because now he is alive within you. This freedom isn't comfortable for everyone. Many prefer having someone tell them what to do, when to pray, how to fast, what's allowed and what isn't. Once you accept it, you begin to walk a path few dare to take, but it's on this path that the divine reveals itself with greater depth. There, you understand you were called for much more than just following rules. You were called to live in truth. And where there is truth, there is no prison. Few talk about this, but it's real. When you awaken spiritually, loneliness comes, and it is not light. It's not the loneliness of being without company. It's the loneliness of realizing that even surrounded by people, you no longer connect the way you used to. You begin to see the world with different eyes. Conversations change, interests change, even prayers change. And this pulls you away, not out of arrogance, but because what you seek now is different, deeper, more authentic. Many don't understand this process. They think you've lost faith or gone astray. But in truth, you are going deeper, diving beneath the surface where few have courage to go. And this path is almost always lonely. You'll notice you can no longer participate in certain circles. You can no longer agree with everything. Your soul begins to reject what you once accepted just to avoid conflict. and that hurts. It hurts because you love those people. It hurts because you wish they understood. But awakening is personal, it's intimate, it's between you and God.